The resurrection of Jesus is often called the foundation of Christianity. But let's be honest, that foundation looks a lot less like bedrock and a lot more like sand. Stories built long after the fact, shaped by politics, mythology, and desperation. Not history, not evidence, just a myth polished into doctrine over time. To understand how this lie was born, you have to start in 1st century Palestine, a backwater province under Roman rule. Occupied, divided, unstable. The Jewish people were waiting for a Messiah, someone to overthrow Rome and restore the kingdom. What they got instead was a failed prophet, crucified like a criminal, abandoned, forgotten, or at least, that's what should have happened. But it didn't, because the story didn't end there. Some followers claimed he came back, that he rose from the dead, that he beat death itself. And that convenient twist transformed a crushed movement into a religion that would reshape the world. But let's slow down. Rome crucified people regularly. It wasn't special. It wasn't rare. It was public execution designed to humiliate. And yet somehow, this crucifixion was different. Why? Because a few decades later, people started writing that Jesus was seen alive again? After 3 days in a tomb? Even if we set aside basic biology, the resurrection reads like theological fan fiction. A desperate attempt to fix the plot after killing off the main character too soon. And it's no coincidence that resurrection stories already existed in surrounding cultures. Osiris, Mithras, Dionysus, dying gods, rising gods. It's a motif as old as myth itself. And the early Christians weren't above borrowing. In fact, they had to borrow. Because nothing about the Messiah dying on a Roman cross made sense to Jewish expectations. They had to reframe it, fast. So they did what religious movements always do. They reinvented failure as victory. Death became sacrifice. A tomb became a triumph. And the people who were left asking, "What now?" were handed an answer. He's not dead. He's risen. Believe that, and everything makes sense again. But the more you examine the resurrection narrative, the shakier it gets. There are no contemporary eyewitnesses. The Gospels contradict each other on basic details. Who found the tomb? Was it guarded? What time of day? How many angels? What did Jesus say? No one agrees. Because these aren't historical records. They're theological propaganda. The letters of Paul, written decades before the Gospels, never mention an empty tomb at all. Just vague references to appearances and being raised. Why? Maybe because the empty tomb story hadn't been invented yet. Maybe because Paul's Jesus was already more of a cosmic figure than a man with a corpse. And let's not forget the obvious. People in grief see things. They have visions. They dream. They hallucinate. It's well documented, and it doesn't require a miracle. Especially when the expectation of resurrection was already in the air. Part of Jewish apocalyptic belief. Add in a few powerful dreams, some wishful thinking, and a good storyteller. And you've got the spark that lit Christianity. But none of that matters to modern believers, because they've already made up their minds. The resurrection is true, because they want it to be. Because without it, the entire religion collapses. Without the resurrection, there's no victory, no eternal life, no reason to keep pretending. So they double down. They tell you the disciples wouldn't die for a lie. As if people haven't died for lies, cults, and delusions for centuries. They wave off the contradictions, ignore the lack of evidence, and claim that faith is stronger than reason. That's not conviction. That's indoctrination. And the most revealing part? Even Christians can't agree on what the resurrection means. Was it literal? Symbolic? Physical? Spiritual? Depends on who you ask. Some say Jesus had a body. Others say he walked through walls. Some say he ate fish. Others say he vanished like a ghost. If this is the most important event in history, you'd think God could have coordinated the script. But he didn't. Because God didn't write it. Humans did. Humans who needed to make sense of loss. Who needed to protect their movement. Who needed something, anything, to keep hope alive. And they found it in a story. A story that grew, shifted, and solidified into dogma. Not because it was true, but because it was useful. Today, the the resurrection still casts a long shadow. It's used to justify everything from political power to personal guilt. Believe in it or go to hell. Question it and you're the enemy. But for a myth supposedly about hope, it sure is drenched in fear. So let's tell the truth. The resurrection wasn't a miracle. It was a marketing strategy, a necessary illusion to save a dying movement. And it worked, spectacularly. Christianity spread, empires were built, wars were fought, all based on the claim that death had been conquered. But death wasn't conquered. It was exploited, used to create a narrative so powerful people still cling to it 2,000 years later, afraid that if it isn't true, then maybe everything falls apart. But if your entire worldview collapses without a zombie Jesus, maybe the problem isn't the world. Maybe it's the lie you were told. And maybe it's time to ask, what's more meaningful? Pretending the tomb was empty, or facing the reality that it never mattered? Because we don't need a resurrection to find meaning. We just need honesty.